Good afternoon and welcome to the Oxford Biodynamics plc full year results webinar hosted by Yellowstone Advisory. We're delighted to have with us today Jon Burrows, the CEO, and Matthew Wakefield, the chairman. I'm now going to hand over to Jon Burrows to start today's presentation.
Thanks, Alex, for that. And also thanks everyone for your time today. I was just going to give a quick reminder. I don't know if you recall this time last year on the webinar, we were talking you through the transformation that OBD has made from being a research and development company with this world-beating technology into a commercial entity. At January last year, we were just on the verge of launching our first commercial product. This was a checkpoint inhibitor response test. We launched it on February the 25th, 2022. I'm not going to steal Jon's thunder, but he's going to give details of how the launch has gone and just how positive the trajectory is at the moment on orders and sales. So over to you, Jon.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon to everybody in the UK and good morning to everybody in the US. It's a pleasure to talk to you today about the progress that Oxford Biodynamics has made commercializing 3D gene regulation for precision medicine with our EpiSwitch technology. So without further ado, let me give everybody a little grounding. We've got an amazing technology that looks at the 3D genomic architecture. And over the last several months, including a few weeks ago when I was at JP Morgan, I've had a lot of comments with people saying, you know, wow, we're starting to get it, but it would be really good if you could keep reminding us where the 3D genome actually lies with respect to what we know about genomics and sequencing, etc. So if you look at this slide, what I'm showing you on the left-hand side is that the genomics that we use today is all about sequencing, NGS, etc. And the epigenetics that we understand mainstream is really about these modifications that sit on top of the code in terms of methylation and histone modifications, etc. Where we sit with the architecture is upstream of all that, where it's contained in all of this DNA and folded in a non-random way. And what this leads us to be able to do is to integrate and simplify the interpretation of all the genomics that's contained therein to the ultimate phenotype, which is clinical outcomes. And we're bringing to the market a reduction to practice of that, where we've mapped the 3D genome and we've compiled this 3D genomic knowledge base. And what that's allowing us to do is to very rapidly build and deploy powerful molecular tests. So that's the background I just want to keep grounding everybody in. And what we've decided to do with this is to focus on the checkpoint inhibitor response test. But to get there, we've built a clinical foundation, excuse me for that, which, as you know, during the pandemic, we reorganized our fundamentals to make clinical diagnostic testing the focus of what we do. And in order to do that, in 2021, we built out our UK infrastructure to support the strategy. We established product development in that UK facility. And in 2022, we focused on building out a commercial team first in the US. We launched the CERT test. We spent many months in 22 successfully learning how to sell CERT in the initial geography that we chose. And this was deliberate because Florida is where there is an awful lot of use of checkpoint inhibitors. A lot of people retire there. A lot of people are in their 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th decade of life. And we put our best salesperson in there and learn how to go about selling the tests and how doctors would be using the test. And then, of course, how to go ahead and train the rest of our sales force. We also captured a unique CPT code very early in 2022, which for me was unprecedented. In all the years that I've been in diagnostics, I've never seen a CPT code that you can bill against for reimbursement of your test come through in less than 4 months. And of course, we spent 2022 with the early adopter focus. So in more detail then, we have a flagship product. It's the checkpoint inhibitor response test, CERT. It's highly relevant. There's a clear medical need. We launched at the end of February, as Matthew said. We have unique CPT and Z codes. We raised during the year equivalent of around $10 million at a premium so that we can expand our commercial sales team and capitalize on the early adopter success of 22 that I'm going to go through in detail with you. And our product development back in the UK lab has given us a very strong portfolio of follow-on tests that are possible in 24, 25 and beyond in prostate cancer, colorectal cancer, in veterinary medicine, which represents a completely different species, but a lot of unmet medical need, especially in canine oncology, in rheumatoid arthritis, where inflammation and degeneration of joints is very, very important to know about. And in ALS, which in the UK is known as motor neuron disease, and I'll be expanding on that a little bit later. So the checkpoint inhibitor response test is the only predictive blood test that determines a patient's likely response to checkpoint inhibitors. It's fast and accurate and easily identifies the individuals most likely to respond. It's a routine blood test. And since the other modalities that are being used, IHC, mutational burden, and mismatch repair, are done in tissue, this represents a real step forward for the doctors. The fact also that our test has a very high sensitivity, specificity, and accuracy also really, really helps the medical community. So after launching in February, we've concentrated on what we call the EVA sales strategy for early adopters, which really stands for extra high volume adopter sales. And that's where we white glove the early adopters, the innovative entrepreneurial doctors that are willing to use this test, and work very closely with them to get them to understand, as we did through March and September, how to use the test so that we can determine how to sell the test and they can pass on those experiences to their network of doctors within their own oncology practices and within the community that they were trained in and live in day to day. This represents the ability to have doctor-to-doctor, peer-to-peer type sales occurring. And I'll tell you how we look to see if that's actually happening. Now, in October, we brought on a second salesperson in the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia geography. And I think you'll see how spending the time to build the foundation has really paid off for us when I show you the numbers. So in 2023, the sales group expansion is underway. We plan to add 3, 4, 5, 6 up to that salespeople in places like New York, California, Midwest, Texas. And the other thing that we're looking to do is to bring on at least one healthcare system in 2023 to start using our tests. And I'll talk about that a bit later too. So what I'm going to show you are the metrics for 22. And we're tracking things like the number of tests ordered, the number of doctors ordering, the number of repeat orders, the number of oncology group practices, and the number of practices with multiple doctors ordering so that we can see how traction is building. So on this slide, what I'm showing you is by the end of 2022, we had 136 orders in the first 9 months from 11 practicing oncologists. And I think what you can see is that in the first 6 months or so, we achieved a very stable mid-teens sales of orders going through to September. And then in October, what you can see is it dropped precipitously. And this is actually because we were in Florida and we had Hurricane Ian taking devastating toll on all the buildings and infrastructure there. But in November and December, we bounced right back, and we started to see an uptick. We also started to see not only an uptick in orders, but if you look at this next chart, we started to see an uptick in the number of oncologists that were ordering from us. This was a very important thing to see. And in the third graphic that I'm showing you, which has been redacted for the doctors' names, but you can see each one of these colors represents a doctor which we build a very close relationship and rapport with, and you can see how they're starting to really use the test and push its adoption. Oops, sorry, big fingers. But on this next panel, which says 2022 run rate, I think what's really important to see here is that as we track the number of orders divided by the number of business or work days in a month for ordering, you can see that where it was stable through the summer, dipped because of the hurricane, in the end of the year, we really did see an uptick from about 0.6 orders a day to around 1 order a day, and then by the end of the year to just around 1.4 orders a day. These are very important metrics, and they actually show that as we distill what we've learned in the first 6 months, continue to push that and train new people and bring them on board, it's having a real effect. And we do know how to sell, and oncologists are they're finding it very, very useful and starting to adopt it. On this next slide, what I'm going to address is, can we maintain and grow momentum in January and through the rest of the year? And I think to recap then, in November, we had 21 orders and 9 doctors on the books. In December, we had 28 orders and 11 doctors on the books. Now in January through last Friday, we had 22 orders. That's a run rate of 1.7 per business day, with there only being so far as last Friday, 13 business days in the month. 4 new doctors had added, and we now have 15 US doctors on the books. We also had a 16th doctor. This is a doctor in Turkey who sent a test through the UK to our US lab, paid for it up front. And so we actually have 16 doctors that have ordered worldwide. We were very gratified to see an ex-US order, and it shows that our system for being able to capture orders around the world works. However, we continue to focus on the US. And what's also very, very gratifying is to see that when we started based on our unique CPT code for reimbursement by bolus reimbursement in November 1, we were able to list at $5,500. This payment cycle is about 60 days. The reimbursements were in the range we expected, between $1,700 and $3,000 per test. That's an average of $2,350. Let me explain the rationale behind the bolus reimbursement. If you send one test at a time in, it's very hard to get the attention of the insurer, the payer. If you wait until you have 5, 10, a bolus of tests to send in, now you get their attention. They look to make sure that you do have a bona fide CPT code and that there is value, and they start to reimburse you accordingly. And that's indeed what we've started seeing. So we're not giving tests away. We have been holding on to them as for bolus reimbursement. that strategy is being very successful. And we believe we should be being paid at least $2,500 per test, even though it lists at $55. So when we get a reimbursement of, let's say, $1,700, that's good. But we have a mechanism where we will bank that payment and then go and appeal for the rest of the payment, so that we make sure we're getting value for a very valuable test that we brought to the market. Now, one of the other things that's important to look at is, what is the addressable market? How can we find out about that addressable market? And what you see here on this chart is that when we track the number of indications that this test is being used in, we see 25 different indications. Now, remember that there are 7, 8 checkpoint inhibitor drugs on the market, and they've been registered in 14, 15 different indications. We see here that the test is being used to see if patients across 25 indications are eligible for a checkpoint inhibitor. This tells us that there is a good understanding with the doctors who are using this test, and that they're willing to use it off-label. It also tells us that the total addressable market for the test is probably close to around 500,000 new patients per year. And that, if you put that into context, 1% of that market would be about 5,000 patients. We are going through the daily work that it takes to capture that first 1%. And then we'll go beyond that and beyond that and beyond that. And 5,000 tests, when we get there, will be worth between $10 and $12 million to the company. This is a substantial revenue engine that is being established for the company. So I'm going to go back for just a second, because one of the things I jumped over on this slide was that what we're also seeing in the orders with doctors as we go through, and we've got 15 doctors on board, is that actually 2 of the oncology groups that we're working with have more than one doctor ordering the test. And that's showing us that the original doctor ordering is talking to the other people in his sphere of influence, and it's driving them to use the test too. That's where the peer-to-peer comes from, and that's how the numbers really start to take off. So also what I want to talk about is the BD Sales and Marketing Group's commercial momentum. We are constantly out talking about the test, advocating for the test. And you can see on this slide, when our CSO, Dr. Alexander Kulichev, was in the US, he teamed up with our COO, Tom Gill, and presented to practicing oncologists in Florida. You can see on the right-hand side a picture of that, but you can also see a response to the posting that we made about this. And on these next slides, I think you can see that we're actually starting to get people commenting in a very positive way about how we are going about capturing the market. On December 6th last year, we had a virtual summit seminar given by Dr. Steve Mammus. He is one of our power users down in Florida in the Saratoga. And this gives us a very high profile. And as you can see, when you read the comments of people who are responding to this, they get what we're doing. They understand that even though we're a new player, we do have a great product, that there is a great market for this. And with our approved reimbursement code, we can continue to build and grow our market share. The other thing that we're doing, which I think is very, very important, is we're talking to another set of physicians, not just the ordering oncologists, but the oncologists that actually are now part of the administration of the insurers and the Medicare system. We call them the payers. They are the people who determine what the value of tests are and how to pay for them. And on December 8th of last year, what we did was we had an initial virtual advisory board with 7 of these people. These are ex-CEOs of companies like Aetna, chief pharmacists at Blue Cross Blue Shield, even the person who buys healthcare for the Teamsters Union, which is in the US, the union that covers the transport workers, etc. They have 40 million covered lives. Altogether, the payers we talk to represent over 100 million covered lives. The rationale for this is that when the insurers get our invoices in bolus and they've never heard of us, even though there's a code which has a substantial price tag to it, they need to go and talk to the advocates and the KOLs in the payer groups and find out and ask questions like, have you heard of this test? Yes, we have. Is it any good? Yes, it is. Does it bring value? Yes, it does. What do the health economics look like? Should I pay for it? Yes, you should. How much should I pay for it? And this is how we work in order to push forward the value of our testing and get more exposure to it. And we're following up on this virtual advisory this coming Saturday on the 28th with a face-to-face advisory board meeting at the National Harbour, where we'll sit down for a whole day with these advocates and really nail down the details of not only what they need to know in order to advocate for us, but also what we need to know to be able to build the best strategies to develop the white papers for healthcare economics and outcomes research, how to publish them, how to go ahead and disperse them. Now, this is a lot about search, but I'm going to switch gears for a minute and tell you about a very exciting opportunity that has been building for the last 4 years as we've been working with Mitsubishi Tanabe on their phase 4 clinical trial in ALS. ALS is known in the UK as motor neuron disease. It's a very debilitating and fatal disease. There are slow and fast progressors. Fast progressors can be dead in 17 to 21 months. Slow progressors may make it as far as 3 years. This drug that Mitsubishi Tanabe has is one of the first on the market that gives any sort of hope to the patients for this fatal disease. And what I'm showing on this slide is the schema for the clinical study. But what I want to get at on this next slide is that when we were at the SITC meeting, and we did a press release on this in December, right before Christmas, we sat down with the doctors at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School who were running this phase 4 for Mitsubishi. And they had analyzed all of the clinical trial data and our biomarker classifier data. And the interim analysis of that revealed, number one, that our classifier correctly diagnoses ALS or MND from other neurodegenerative conditions from a baseline blood sample. Now that is very, very important because up to 20% of ALS diagnosed patients actually aren't ALS. So you need to know who's who. Baseline blood is a very simple and easy way to do this. Secondly, our classifier was shown to identify patients who are either fast or slow progressing before they start the treatment. This is very important because it can save up to 12 months of uncertainty for the fast progressing patients. It usually takes up to a year or more for the neurodegenerative workup to confirm if they're fast or slow. And by that time, they only have a few months of life left. The VP of Medical Affairs at Mitsubishi Tanabe really does believe that these are clinically meaningful systemic biomarkers. And the director of the NCRI unit at Massachusetts General Hospital not only believes they're cutting edge and meaningful biomarkers, but that these non-invasive biomarkers enable people to successfully predict slow versus fast progressors at baseline. That is up to a year before they would ordinarily know. This is a massive opportunity for Mitsubishi. It's a massive opportunity for our company going forward. And it shows that it takes 4 or 5 years to come through, but it really can come through. It also shows that the EpiSwitch technology itself can span the medical across medicine and is not just applicable in immuno-oncology, but also in things like ALS. So I'm going to start wrapping up now by just recapping our commercial product, the checkpoint inhibitor response test, has very good early adopter success. And we're continuing to push on that for growth in 2023. Our product development portfolio is very healthy and bodes well for us in the years to come, and shows that we can work across medicine, even across species in veterinary medicine in dogs. And in summary, what I'll leave you with is, I believe that what I've talked to you about and been able to show is that OBD achieved very considerable commercial progress in 2022. We launched the CERT test early in the year. We received a CPT code for reimbursement in record time. We had significant adopter traction in 2022 sales. We've shown early signs of the ability to grow those sales in 2023. The reimbursement that we're getting is at expected levels and starting to come through, which should continue to build in 2023 and drive our revenue engine. Although we've had very challenging project discussions with pharma, and we are yet to see them actually sign on the dotted line, we're still there with them, and we are pushing them along. I really think that the success that we've had with our commercial clinical product really does show that we made the right decision to take our destiny into our own hands in 2020 and start going commercial, so that we can build a revenue engine for the company with commercial products and work with pharma, but not be caught in the tail and headwinds that often happen in big pharma. So all in all, I think that the outlook for 2023 is very positive for the company. And just to quote a good friend of mine who basically said to me, wow, Jon, we've got a tiger by the tail here. And I really do believe that's true. So I'll stop there and take questions. And thank you for your attention.
Jon, thank you very much for that. We are now going to take questions. And just as a reminder, if you want to ask a question, please type it into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. So let's take that first question. There was a big pharma announcement last year, Jon, regarding the signing of a master service agreement with a big pharma company, but there's been little said since on any contracts. Wondered if you could comment on that and give us an update on what's happening there.
Yeah, it's actually a good question. So, you know, when you work with pharma, you're really tied to the success of the drug development that's going through. And those can, in their interim analyses, look good, bad, indifferent. It's never publicized and we don't know exactly, but when we start to see contracts that we thought would teed up slowing down, we definitely start to think, well, internally there's something going on, a change of direction, or a data set that they're still trying to understand. But also, we have to work with champions and influencers inside the company. And in the case of the big pharma that we talked about last year, we did have the retirement of our champion, and that led to a real slowing down with us, where we've had to actually re-engage and re-educate with the new people that came in. I think that the other 5 pharma that we're working with are a little bit, behind the curve in terms of paperwork. Negotiations still working. There's still a lot of appetite. We aren't seeing it as quickly as we thought we would. I think it will come, but those are the things that happen when you work with pharma. And again, not being tied to just that as the way that we can make revenue and having our own commercial product, I think it is really the key to our success going forward.
Thank you, Jon. Second question we've got here is, what's the current run rate in US dollars for revenue per month in January 2023?
I must admit, I didn't do that calculation, but if I take a look at it, and I think that, let's say in January, we'll hit 30 tests and we'll get $2,500 each. So we're looking at about $70,000. And we're building and building and building from there. As you can see, that run rate keeps on increasing. And the addressable market is very large. And one thing I should point out is, this is really early days right now, but the signs are good. The way the wind is blowing is looking very good. Now, as we go from 2 field sales persons to 6 or more, as we go after the hospital system groups, we should definitely be able to take advantage of the addressable market that's out there. And let's just think about what a hospital system might mean to our revenue. And our ambition is to capture at least one of those in 2023. That even the smallest health systems in the US have 50, 100, 150 hospitals under their umbrella. And the idea here is that taking this type of adoption that we've got and health economics that we can already talk about to them and showing what it could look like across a series of hospitals, even running a proof of concept in one hospital where you've probably got 10 oncologists and then expanding into the 50, 100, 150 that they have. As you do that sequentially, what you're getting access to is a large amount of testing, which can really push you along. And that's what we're trying to do, is to pull on more of the 6,000 oncologists that work in oncology groups and start expanding into the health systems that have many, many hospitals under their umbrellas.
Thank you for that. As a follow-on question here is, what's the gross margin for these tests?
So the gross margin is very good for the company. At these types of reimbursement levels, it's at 90% or above.
Okay. And again, following on some numbers on the financials, can you talk about the cash burn and how what happens to that as you increase your sales force?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, because whereas we have funded ourselves through the end of the year, what's really good about our strategy is that growing out the number of salespersons doesn't add a substantial amount to our burn, especially since they start paying for themselves relatively quickly. You can see in the example that we have, when Andrea came on board in October, because of the experiences that we'd had knowing how to sell the test, how doctors will interact with the test, she was able to get up to speed by the middle of November and go out there and start selling to doctors, what you can see is the impact of that was almost immediate. We started seeing increased numbers of doctors, increased numbers of tests being layered upon the growth that was occurring already in Florida. We see that essentially what's happening is that the burn doesn't go up substantially with the new salespeople on, and because they get up to speed so quickly, they're essentially paying for themselves as they go.
Okay, thank you. Final question, or for the time being, on sort of costs and revenues. What revenue is needed to be cash flow break even?
Yeah, now that's a very, very interesting question. It's multidimensional. If you look at it one-dimensionally and you say, okay, break even means that you're making more than you spend, you see, that's where it becomes multidimensional, right? Because as you chase the success and go after bigger and bigger parts of the market, you probably spend more money. You don't stand still. However, if you go back and you say our last raise was around $10 million, that is, dollar equivalents, then you can easily see that you have to go after 1% of the market and keep building, because 5,000 tests actually represents 10 million or more.
Okay, thank you. Is there a large base of patients that you could sign up which would transform the cash metrics, i.e. the Teamsters?
I think that it goes back actually to the hospital systems. Let's look at the Teamsters. All of those people that are covered by insurance plans nationwide, and the patients are actually all in a lot of different hospital groups, right, where they go for their treatments. So you certainly, and this is what we're trying to do, can make sure that if they need the test, they can ask for it or get the test. Now, remember, when you say 40 million covered lives, right, how many of them are actually going to go to the doctor to get a diagnosis that they have a cancer that's actually addressable by a checkpoint inhibitor? That's why the addressable market is 500,000 people across the whole of the US. So what you really have to do is get all of the doctors to understand the value of this test, and the payers to start telling them about it too, so that when the patient comes and needs the help, they will reach for the test.
Okay, thank you. A question here about the JP Morgan conference. That coincided with major issues to US airline industry, with numerous cancelled and delayed flights. Did you notice a low attendance at that conference?
It's actually true. I did. I'm not sure it was necessarily because of the disruptions, because everybody that I had already talked to a month or two before that I knew was going to be there did manage to get there and show up. I did see, though, that there are a lot of people that aren't willing to travel quite so much still, and the people that like virtual. Now, that's really good for us, right? Because part of the sales and marketing that we do, a large part of it is virtual and social media based. And so being able to reach people, especially when that's the type of format that they like to learn and be educated in, really helps. I will say, though, JP Morgan, even though the attendance wasn't as much as I would have expected for the second year out, was still really, really important to go to, because talking to somebody face to face, being able to get into the details and the things that they really want to understand about what you're doing, you just can't do it any other way. And that's where I think we started to see that a lot of aha moments as we were explaining what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how our technology is building a brand new market in genomics.
Thank you. Can you talk now to repeat orders? How many doctors have ordered, say, more than 2, and is that building? And are you over reliant on 1 or 2 doctors placing lots of orders?
Yeah, that's always something which we try to tease out and check in our metrics. What we are seeing is that early on, we were reliant on a few doctors, 5 or 6, and there were multiple orders. What we're seeing now as the number of doctors jump is that the relative contribution of just a single doctor isn't taking the majority of the orders. And actually, there's an interesting thing that we're seeing is that new doctors coming on often only order 1 just to see what's going on. But we've seen a trend where, because they've been informed and they're getting access to the case studies from cases that other doctors that have used us in the past 9 months have experienced, and the ability to actually talk to them and see what's been going on, we're seeing they're very quickly ordering 2, 3 at a time as they come on, and that's a very good trend for us.
Thank you. Can you talk about the next product that you might hope to launch in 2023 or beyond?
You know, one of the reasons why we put that list of 5 up there with prostate, colorectal, vet med, rheumatoid arthritis, and ALS, MND is because that's sort of our league table. And if you take a look at that, those are the 5 that are furthest along. I would definitely say that prostate sits on the top just because of the maturity of the clinical research data, the collaborators that we've been with, and the unmet medical need out there in the medical community, where we know that there are millions of men that need to have prostate checkups. We know that the PSA test is not very informative, even though it's widely spread, and that there is a gap. However, I must admit, when things that you don't expect, like I alluded to in November, when we sat down and saw the interim data from the Harvard doctors at MGH around ALS, you look at that and you say, well, could that vault to the top? You look at the work that we've been doing recently in canine oncology, where we've successfully built a canine chip. So we have a human chip, which has been the basis of all of our knowledge base and the work that we do in humans. Now we have the canine chip. And I think if I remember from my last visit to the UK, which was only a week ago, but jet lag does kind of, we've already run 60 arrays on there and are looking at the top 10 canine oncology cancers. So by the middle of the year, what does that look like? Does that jump up? So what I'm saying is it could be any of the 5. They're always jockeying for position, and I call it a league table because it is kind of like the Premier League table. You never know who's going to win, but there's a lot of upside for us. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. What are the regulatory risks of going down the lab-developed test route as opposed to seeking FDA approval?
There's an awful lot of confusion and misinformation, I think, about the FDA, lab-developed tests, etc. My team has decades of experience. Myself, working at Chiron and Ventana and Roche, and even at the last company that I sold, Oncoplex Diagnostics, where LDTs were what we used to penetrate the market, to get on the market, and in many cases, never had to go down the FDA route. You can see things like the Oncotype DX breast test, which never, ever went through the FDA. it was the most successful breast test, and it was actually bought by Exact Sciences not too long ago. Their competitor, which was MammaPrint, went the FDA route and completely lost out. And so what I would say to people is that, yes, the FDA has oversight, but the LDT cap clear regulatory pathway is mandated by Congress. And it is a way for important tests, medical devices that aren't harming people to get on the market, to generate revenue to keep the companies alive, but also generate data that helps the patients that need to know what's going on with their doctors. So, I mean, the LDT route is well known with biotech in the US. And I think what we've shown here is that it is a viable way to get on the market and to start to penetrate the market.
Thank you for that. Are any of the current macro factors affecting you either positively or negatively? For example, inflation, the IRA, M&A across the biotech sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no, I mean, they're out of our control. And in some ways, you feel like a ship bouncing around the ocean. We are working on the fundamentals and the things that we can control in a financial markets situation which we can't control, where there's a lot of headwinds, there's a lot of I don't think anybody can control a lot of the levers right now. You have to just keep working and not be too dismayed when the success you have isn't being reflected in your stock price, when it's obvious that you're making considerable steps forward and leaps and bounds, but the other factors in the market just that affect everybody at that macro level aren't going to let anything move. And so for me as a CEO, it's difficult because it's difficult to raise money, even though I think our investors were fantastic last year, giving us the runway that we needed and coming in at a premium. But you have to work towards that time in 23 or 24, and let's hope it's sooner rather than later, when things do start to give and you can start then to make headway in the market.
John, I might just add something on that point, something you hadn't covered because there's been a lot of information given out. But, looking at macro factors, the very fact that, we're saving the insurance industry something like $10 billion in the US on the 70% of money which is wasted on checkpoint inhibitors. That must be a positive, I would have thought.
It's a massive positive, but who's going to give you credit for it? It's actually the people who help share prices move. And I think there's going to be a pent up sentiment, if you like, that when things are able to move and people start coming back to our sector and see it as a place where they want to be with their money, they'll look at stocks like ours and they'll say, wow, the arbitrage there, look at what they've done. And that's what really keeps me going, is keep doing it, because these cycles do move. Unfortunately, we don't know when.
Thank you. You launched the cert test in the UK in June. Are you making any progress over here in the UK?
So it's open to people in the UK, mostly to private medical insurance. We are talking to people in the UK. Adoption of something which is ex-UK and isn't mainstream takes quite a while. We are looking for proof of concept. We're looking for groups and talking to groups that will take this on. And based on the data that we've been able to show in the last couple of months, understand that there's something to this. There is a value to be had. And really, we've said this right from the beginning when we took on our single geography in Florida. You can put the test up there. We know it works. We know what it's capable of doing, but you've got to put it into the hands of the professionals who do it and allow them to figure it out. And it just takes time. It's sort of like selling a new sports car. We know that it can go from 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds, but someone's got to get in it and experience that and then tell someone else about it.
Okay, thank you. What is your social media strategy for what could appear a bit of a game changer, patient-friendly test?
So social media actually is really working well for us, I think, when we let people know what we're up to. We're on Twitter and Instagram, and LinkedIn is a big place for this because there's a lot of professionals there. As we get a following and as people look at the sort of things that we can, now that this is in the public domain, start to show them, I think that that's going to make a big difference. And where it's going to make the biggest difference, in my opinion, is in two places. One is it's going to keep our marketing budget low because it's a great way to reach people. That we've been trying for a long time, but I think expanding that now is very doable. But the second thing is that, especially in the US market, where we are establishing ourselves first, patients are very savvy, and patients and their family members and their advocates very quickly take control of their own treatment. They work closely with their doctors. The fact that they can see the success of a test like ours means that I think that we'll start to see that extra oomph from the patient and the patient advocates asking for this test. Because let's face it, none of these patients want to go on a drug that's not going to help them and cost them hundreds of thousands, especially if they're not covered completely by insurance. And the other big part of this is, if it doesn't work, that's 9 months of their life or their remaining life where they could have been doing something else. And there's 40 to 70% of the patients that don't respond get toxic. So a lot of reasons now to start getting that messaging out more and more. And it's on the back of, oh, look, people are using it. It is successfully being paid for. And the other thing, Alex, which is really important, is this test isn't free, but this test doesn't cost the doctor or the patient anything. We bill directly the insurance company. We don't balance bill the patient or the doctor, and we negotiate with the insurance company if we don't think they've paid enough. And as you've seen right here, we are already, even in the first set of bolus going through, being paid exactly what we expect the value to be. And when it's a little short, we're able to go back and appeal.
Thank you for that, John. We've got one final question here. I'm not sure you'll be able to answer it in its entirety, but I'll leave you with it because I'm sure you'll be able to give us a couple of thoughts. What would management consider to be a good year?
That's an excellent question that I ask myself all the time. And as you know, I think it's really hard to project and numbers at a time like this, in a market like this, for a product that's just getting into the market. But looking at what we have here and being conservative, if I was to look at this and say, what would I consider successful? I would consider getting 6 salespeople running in the company in 2023 and 1 hospital group using the product. If I looked at that and generate, and people can figure these numbers out for themselves because we've given you all of the numbers that you would need to project this. I think we'll be well on our way to chasing that 1% of the market, which has to be the next milestone for us. Now, whether it happens in 23 or 24, I don't know. But I also have to say that, you know, I've been doing this for 25 years or more. And in my experience in the industry, it's unprecedented to me how quickly this is from scratch in March starting to be adopted and take off. So conservatively, that's what I would say.
Well, that comes to the end of the questions, Jon, and I think that's a very encouraging note to leave this on. So thank you very much for presenting and taking all those questions. Just a reminder to people attending that as you leave today, there will be a survey to complete. Wouldn't mind you completing that survey. I know management find that very useful. And just to flag up, going forward, a couple of future webinars that we have in March, 9th of March, Road Talk, on the 20th of March, Tullow Oil, and on the 21st of March, IMI.